Hey, everybody, welcome to DBS Films Podcast. My name is Kellen. With me, as always, is my brother Brendan, and together we make movies with DBS Films. On today's episode, we're going into part 2 of a scene-by-scene breakdown of our third movie, The Unseen. Unfortunately, you can't see it online anymore. It did not make it through the great Amazon purge, but if you take a look at our Discord channel, we will have a link for you to view it. Also, be sure to take a look at The Haunting in the Murder House, which is now online, and also be sure to take a look at Into the Forest, which is now on Tubi. That means the world to us if you watch those. But as always, we make movies for our fans with our fans. So if you want to be part of the action, if you want to be part of the casting calls, all of the fun stuff that we do, you're going to go ahead. You're going to want to make sure you join our Discord community. So hopping into part 2, I think let's have a little bit of a recap of that first half. Again, you can take a look at the first episode that we released earlier in this week on kind of the details there. But the big thing that we point to with The Unseen is this is the first movie that really fits into the horror genre. We finally had pop scares, even though they might not have been, perfectly executed. And then we just completely flopped when it came to the character development and the downbeats. Would you say that's a good way to sum it up, Brendan?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're starting to see the TBS structure of how we actually, write these movies and stack them with beats that are entertaining and that let the audience know this is a horror movie. Do we hit on any of these beats? Not really, but we don't mess them up enough to where they're essentially missing. They're flat, but they're creating some sort of mystery element, or it's at least piquing your curiosity to be like, all right, like something weird is going on here. This movie may not be the best, but I'm just going to kind of keep going with it to see what happens. And the fact that we have all these scares or tension scenes in there, makes it easy for people to watch. Because the pop scares are not good, there's enough of them and we're not missing completely, that allows the viewer to, just continually watch. And this was an issue in our first two movies, Gone and The Invited. They're very slow. They miss on a lot of things. And the viewer just kind of falls off. So I think this is the first one where, we kept the viewer somewhat engaged. Is it a good movie? No, but there's enough there to get them from start to finish.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, as we mentioned before, it was actually one of our more popular movies when it came to, actually how it performed. And I think it's because it does have that, a little bit of taste of a actual horror movie, which again, when you get all things moving, you hit that horror audience, you're going to have a good favor when it comes to the algorithms. So we're going to go ahead and pick up in the halfway point. We just had probably the best pop scare of the movie, which was the throat grab, which we said was really, really well done. She wakes up the next morning, and this little scene in the beginning is basically her waking up, getting ready, and the boyfriend, who is doing a terrible job of being supportive, she's like, you need to get out of the house. She get out of the house. And she's like, well, I can't. And then there's a little bit of dialogue, and I think I just want to highlight this because this is such an indie trope of what happens. She mentions, hey, have you been drinking the milk? And he's like, oh, I used the rest of it. And she's like, I just bought it. And then he's like, you're deflecting. You need to go get out of the house there. Well, that little dialogue about there not being milk was supposed to establish the idea that things are going missing. Things are happening and disappearing because, again, there's someone living in the attic. So do you want to quickly talk about that scene and just how in our heads that's, oh, wow, we pointed back to it. But in reality, no one's going to pick up on that.
And it comes back to, what we learned and we put into practice in the murder house. We told the audience multiple times what kind of movie this is going to be, what exactly is happening at all times, and kind of foreshadowed what's going to happen at the climax of the movie. And you go back and watch that movie and go back and watch this movie, they're completely different. You really don't understand what's going on in this movie. The things that, are building the plot and foreshadowing, which is the pills, which happened earlier in the movie, where she's had a scene where she looked at the pills and threw them out. You don't even know that they're her pills. You don't know why she's throwing them out. And then the second scene is when, this scene comes up and someone's eating their food and drinking their milk. This is a pretty big plot point. It should have full attention. The whole scene should be centered around the fact that, food is missing. And is it the girl going crazy, or is there something else happening in this house? And instead, the way we wrote it was kind of like it's just kind of off there in the distance. We never really bring it up. It's kind of like just a small little plot point. If you're not actively listening and paying attention to the movie, you totally forget about it. But this is a big scene to, build tension, let the audience know what's going on in this movie, and we just miss it. And so this is going to create a lot of issues with this film because the audience is going to turn it off because they're going to get confused. The audience is going to turn it off because we're not building any suspense or tension. And then the audience is at the end of it is probably going to leave a low review because they don't understand what's going on. They're going to have a lot of questions. The movie's going to leave them confused because we did not explain the plot. We did not bring up these scenes and give them the attention to detail that they needed, which in turn just creates confusion. And once again, you're going to hear me say it a ton of times, never confuse your audience. A confused audience is going to turn the movie off, and a confused audience is going to give you very low ratings.
100%. You want to be crystal clear, drive that point home, pick a few points in your plot and just really refocus on that. I always say the biggest thing you have to understand is that they're not actually watching your movie. They're on their phone, they're talking with someone, they're doing other things. Unless you're in a movie theater, no one's sitting down and staring directly at that movie for the entire time. So you have to reinforce those plot points. In the writing process, it might feel like overkill, but trust me, if anything, it's always, always too little. So with that, we're hopping into it. We have a nice little scare. And I remember adding this one, and I'm proud of this one because, again, we're all hopping little pop scares in. She's just sitting there having breakfast, and then bam, there's Dee, our grandma. And Dee, honestly, was one of the later elements. She actually was not in the movie for the longest time. And she really pulls it together, in my opinion, of at least having something. Because, I mean, gosh, I can only imagine not having that character. It would be really brutal. So she shows up, she wanders in, she starts making some sandwiches, and they're like, what is going on here? You can't be here. Gabby comes back in. She's like, I'm so sorry. And then Gabby's like, hey, do you want to drink a little bit? I could use it. And then they start talking, and oh man, the color goes from day to night here. But they start talking, and again, it's kind of exactly what we mentioned, where she brings up the point, someone lived there earlier. They bring up the Rocky, like the one thing that they bring up as well when they're on the couch talking, Gabby and our lead actress, is she starts talking about how there's like a rocky past and they went through stuff, but we never actually say what it is. So it's just confusing. And then we bring up, hey, there was someone here, but they were gone. When realistically, if we do it again, that entire conversation would be about the person who lived here before and, how they were friends with the grandma or whatever, because that's what we actually want to build. We don't care about this relationship, but it was one of those things where it's kind of shallow there. So how do you feel about the D pop scare? While it was pretty rough, I think it highlights you should have something over nothing. And then from there, the downbeat explaining, there's someone that could be in the house is what we're trying to
do. Yeah, the D pop scare, I think, just sums up this movie. It's something there. It hits to a very small extent. It's not done very well, but it's something. Like, it just keeps you going. It's much better than nothing. We could easily not had anything there. So, when you're making your movies, if you're in the horror genre, it's better to put more stuff, go harder than it is to, not have things in there at all. And, you never want to make a boring movie. You can make a good movie, you can make a bad movie, don't make a boring movie. And I think that this is what this is. It's a bad movie, but it's not boring and did very well. People watched it all the way through. It made a lot of money. As far as the downbeat, there's a lot of issues with this. Number one, the editing is really poor. Shooting it is very poor. The location is actually pretty good. It's like on a couch with windows, so it looks kind of good. The dialogue is absolutely terrible. This dialogue is written, once again, it's perfect dialogue. Characters do not talk like this. And this is, I think, one thing that I learned about direction and screenwriting is, what is the scene of the, or what is the purpose of this scene? Like, what are we trying to do here? Because to me, there's like 3 or 4 different things that they bring up, which are just going to confuse people. For this scene, it should be, why do I think that someone is living in my house? Explain like what is going on. And that should be the whole point of the scene. But at this point, the main character should have done some research on her own. The main character in this movie, the biggest problem with her is she's a very passive character. She never goes out and tries to figure out what's going on. All these actions and events are just happening to her, and it's her reacting. It's hard to root for a character where bad things just keep happening to them and they're not doing anything. After the milk scene, she should have done research on the house, on the neighborhood, and found like some news articles about the girl who went missing, Dee, in the attic. And then she should have brought the neighbor girl over to drink and been like, hey, this is what I found. Do you know anything about this? And then you build more lore about it. That would have been the best way to do it. Instead, we're talking about her trauma. We're talking about her grandma. We're talking about bringing up like maybe someone's living in the house a little bit. But for the most part, like, do not stagger things like this. Do not do this because you're just going to confuse people. And it's just a screenwriting, issue. And it's one that we've resolved a lot. I think if you look how we did the Murder House versus what we started with this, you'll see an exponential jump in just screenwriting and understanding how to tell a proper movie.
Yeah, I think that really does sum it up when it comes to the screenwriting, the proper process for telling a movie. Because again, it's just it's a really poor character execution. And again, that's when we talked about how, people point to the acting, but really it's more or less the characters we build. So, Gabby, she ends up having her drink, they talk about it, and then they leave. She goes out to the store, and when she comes back, the door is open, which honestly, that's a really good setup for a scare. You know what I mean? That's very basic stuff. She gets it. She gets the bat. She goes up in the room. We have like music there. And then she finds the ring on the floor. Oh my gosh, the ring. So they have the ring on the floor. And then from there, we get our legendary Officer Reynolds, who, if you've seen him in the DBS saga, he really is a true champion in the sense of having him in the universe. But basically, the cop comes, and man, talk about like Gaslight Central. It's both basically the boyfriend and the cop telling her that she's crazy, nothing happened, the door was open, all of this stuff. And, then from there, they kind of bicker. So let's kind of separate this. How do you feel about that scare? Because I think that's solid. Again, I think we hit on the elements there. Maybe have something non-threatening pop out, like a pool sheet or something there, because we kind of just had the music fade out. But I think that was a good setup for one of the later passive scares, where you show a situation that could be dangerous. You have the character has to go through the situation, and then nothing actually happens.
Yeah, I mean, it's good. Like anytime you come back and your door's open, we had a really good opportunity because it was raining out. We could have had her come through the house and have the power turn out with like thunder effect. Then she's in the dark, she's struggling for the phone. She's trying to get the phone, and she like lifts it up and sees the boyfriend there. And then she freaks out saying that someone's in the house. And then you get to Reynolds. The ring thing, I don't even like looking back on it and even understanding it now. I still don't understand what we were trying to do there. It's very bizarre. I can't even remember, like, she thought someone else was in there because they left the ring or something like that. It's just weird. But if you would have had that in the dark with the boyfriend, that's a good pop scare that you could have had. And then you bring in Officer Reynolds, much better transition scene as well. And she's just freaking out that, the door's open. The ring is like weird. And I feel like the only reason the ring was there was to put in that perfect dialogue thing where she goes, it's like, God forbid you're like, heaven help me, you would never give me a ring as like a marriage proposal thing. And people don't talk like that. It's a very weird dialogue line. And honestly, I think that might be the only reason we had that ring thing in there, because if you had her just see that the door is open, go through the house, power goes off, she's turning around, there's a lot of tension, we're blasting scary music, she turns, the boyfriend's there, segue to Officer Reynolds. It's just much cleaner without the ring. So like when you're writing a screenplay and you're on something like this with the ring, just remove it. And if the script works, then it wasn't necessary. And I think a lot of like indie filmmakers and the mistakes that we made in our first 8 movies, we're complicating things for no reason. We're adding things in that don't do anything to the story. And if you're making movies that are an hour, 20 minutes like we are, every single piece of dialogue is so important. You really have to make sure that plot is moving forward, and anything that's not pushing that plot forward should be cut.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. You have such limited time and limited attention span that if you're not actually pushing forward with the correct plot line, it's just going to be a waste. And as you said, a lot of the things that we do in these early movies, you just delete the whole thing there. So they, we go from having the ring and then being gaslit. She has that perfect conversation, as we mentioned too. And I think this also goes back to a big flaw that we do this whole scene there, and why we kind of don't like the characters, because they're just bickering. So real quick, do you kind of want to talk about how the following scene after, she finds the ring, when we have that perfect dialogue back and forth of like, God forbid you give me the rings, who are you cheering for here? Because both of these characters frankly suck, and it's not their fault. It's just because we wrote them like that.
Yeah, I'm cheering for the monster. I mean, that was the same issue that that we ran into with Girl in Cabin 13. If you're doing a one couple movie in one location house, it's very difficult to have them not gaslight each other, because if they both agree, if they're both like, hey, this is really weird, something's in this house, let's leave. And then you don't have a horror movie. So they have to kind of go back and forth. I think this one's just a little bit easier because, he's starting to doubt the girl. Obviously, she's having mental stress issues and a mental breakdown. But once again, we come back to clarity. That was never brought up. And then I think he randomly is like, you stop taking your pills. And it's just like, what? Like, when did this happen? Oh, it happened in the beginning of the movie for 30 seconds when she just randomly threw away the pills. The clarity of the movie's all over the place. I don't know what's going on. So yeah, who are you rooting for? I have no idea. I have no idea. So at this point in the movie, we're probably heading to the third act or the climax. I don't know what's going on. I don't like either of the characters. And I just, like, what is the plot? Like, what is going on here? And that is just not where you want to be heading into the final climax of your movie.
Yeah, no, it really is pretty brutal in the sense of just where you're putting the characters in like favorability with the audience. Again, there's not a lot to like about any of these characters, and more so over, it's ours. It's our fault for doing that. But with that being said, really, I think that's one of the biggest things, that because we've been doing it, we understand this process. We try and give these characters out for one reason or the other when it comes to how they're handling the situations. And more importantly, we try not to have two characters anymore. So we go from that scene, they just had a massive fight. You're like, guys, this is just terrible. Like, why can't they just, be normal? She comes back. He's got a security camera now, because we have the end footage with the security camera and we have it as reviewing it. So this is us setting up a plot device. I think that's very well done, in the sense of you had a plot element that comes back here. It was really smart there. The only issue with it is it was a single tripod shot with like no cut ins, so kind of boring in that sense. They go to sleep and we get another good scene for the wake up, I would say, which is they ended up Dee was in the kitchen and she set off the smoke alarm. So they're sleeping and we get a smoke alarm scare, which is always good too. And from there, basically, they end up having another fight and the stress is there. So do you want to talk about now how it goes from adding that plot device with the security camera? But then, in my opinion, I think that's another smooth, the outlines there of there's a fire alarm, they wake up, that causes it there, and it's still a passive scare. I would say one of the big differences that I do want to talk about now is we're 39 minutes in this movie and you haven't seen the chick yet, the person living there yet. And at this point in time, typically where we're at, within 20, 25 minutes, you want to establish the threat to some degree. So what do you kind of think about this, scene of you have the plot point with the camera, which is good with the setup, but then also we're still just doing passive pop scares?
Yeah, I think there's no tension in this movie. Like, there's no stakes. And that's a huge issue. Are the lives, like, right now, the biggest stake in this movie is, okay, these people could break up. So their relationship is at stake. Well, that's great if you're making a romance movie, but this is a horror movie. Your life should be in danger. And we never bring that up. The only time we brought up, that their life is in danger is after the intro hook. but she should have been doing research. There should have been multiple people like killed in this house or in this general area. There needs to be, multiple people should have been missing. There needs to be more attention to this. Their lives should be in danger, and that'll keep the viewer more entertained. Right now, it's like, oh no, they might break up. Great, we're making a CW romance movie. So that's like a big time flaw, in this movie, because at this point, heading into the climax, because this movie is shorter, you need to establish that these people's lives are in danger, that there is actual consequences to every action that they're about to make. And that's never clear. And I think the tension, missing from this movie really hinders it and is a huge, huge problem, that could have been addressed in the screenwriting process.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, again, the screenwriting process with pretty much all of the issues for this movie come up, in my opinion, and it's just something where we don't have the experience for it because of that. So with that being said, we now are going into another scene where she's stressed out talking with her wedding client, and then behind her you have someone run across the screen. I think this is a textbook one again. I mean, really, if you look at all of our scares, they are basically pulled, from what works in movies, which is something that I highly recommend any filmmaker do. You have to try and do that. But they're on a Zoom call, and basically behind her someone runs past her, goes upstairs. Her client's like, oh, someone was there. We get another scary moment, walking up the stairs, and then boom, it's her boyfriend. And then we pull away from it. So again, I think the only reason that this has some sort of life hanging on for life support is because even though we're not executing on them, we're still having the ability to have something happen. It's not being completely boring. So how do you feel about this pop scare in the sense of, again, another passive pop scare? The main character still doesn't know what the main thing is. We still don't even know that there's a threat in the house, really. And we're about 45 minutes into this thing.
Yeah, I think like the issue, like we did a good job of stacking the pop scares, but I think like the next level, from someone who's an amateur horror director, screenwriter, to someone who's actually a little bit more seasoned, is not just having these pop scares in there, but where to place them. And that's like a big thing, because you want to start them off with like the least, like on an intro scene, you want to have a very aggressive pop scare, but from after that, you want to have, ones that are, they could chalk it up as something normal. And then with each sequential pop scare, they get more and more aggressive to build that tension. And it's actually very difficult to do that, because you don't really know whether or not pop scare is going to come off as aggressive or not aggressive. And this one's a very kind of passive pop scare. It's just a shadow person. This could have been moved up way earlier in the movie and would have made a better, a better scene, a better movie, if you probably would have taken this and put it near that D pop scare where she just kind of shows up in the window. So yeah, we did have pop scares. Did the pop scares work? Not really. There are a lot of them are flat, but I think the more important issue is we didn't stack them correctly. And you really need to be able to do that. You got to start from, the pop scare that can be chalked up as anything up until, oh boy, there is something here and it's really bad. And I think the only way to do that is just by experience. It's just very difficult to get a sense of, the attention in these pop scares. Because number one, the pop scare has to hit, and then it comes down to the reaction of the actors. And, we've done 12 movies now, and it's still very difficult for me to figure out, where to put these pop scares and, where to put them in the movies and whether or not they're actually going to hit.
Yeah, I mean, it really is the case where even now there's still a learning curve to it. So we have that John comes out. He's basically like, you're crazy again, which is kind of standard for him. And then we have the night scare where I think this is a perfect example of you hold on, you latch on to an idea being good. And I think there still is a way that we can do this, that it works. maybe more with like a shapeshifter or something, or some kind of like demon or something. But like in hindsight, this makes zero sense for someone who's trying to hide in the attic to do what they do here. She's sleeping. What ends up happening is she gets up from bed. We clearly see there's someone in bed with her. Obviously, it's her boyfriend. She goes to the bathroom. She's washing her hands, and then her phone rings, and it's her boyfriend. Her boyfriend's like, "Hey, sorry, I'm out, getting something." And she's like, "Wait, what?" And then she turns, and the person in the bed we see in the background leaves. So that means the person sleeping in the bed with her wasn't her, which in context makes absolutely zero sense. If you're trying to stay hidden in a house, the last thing you're going to do is go sleep in the bed with that person. But again, we thought it was such a great scare and whatnot. She goes down, and then she goes ahead and she has a call there. And I will also say another thing I want to highlight with the scene, because she goes down and she talks to her boyfriend. She's like, "There's someone in the house. I know it was here." She did such a great job with this movie. She really did. And it was just the last day of the shoot, super stressful and everything there. And you can just feel that she's kind of broken and tired in that. And again, it happens to everyone. And I think it's another testament of why you want to make sure you're nailing these scenes earlier on, because, that's probably the climax of the movie in the sense of how panicked she should be. So to me, I think this was our biggest swing and a miss in the sense of what we had. I think the issue for it was because from the very beginning, we're like, no, we want to do this and this is scary. In concept, yes, that twist is scary. In execution of what it is, no, it doesn't make any sense, and it had no need for being in this movie, in my opinion.
Yes, I'm going to completely disagree with you. I think that this is the best scare and the perfect way to go into a climax, because you have to show that there's something in there, and you have to do it in a way that's kind of interesting. And do I think we executed on it? No, I think it's shot terribly, and I don't think it's done very well. But to get you into a climax while showing you physically that there's something that was sleeping in you, which is a primal fear, I think is done really, really well. As far as like the motivations of the girl, well, obviously she's kind of crazy because she lives in the attic. Like maybe she gets lonely and just wanted a nice cuddle. Okay, there you go. And I think that if it was shot better and done better and edited better, it would have worked a lot better. But I still think I like this one. I think that this one was a cool way to get you to the climax. You're physically seeing the thing for the first time. And I think it just needed to be cleaned up. I mean, it's just the moral of the story with this one is we did things, we paced it proper, we had the beats in there. The beats were just kind of flat. And as far as like the climax, going to the climax, this scene should have been done earlier in the movie because everyone was getting tired at this point. We had multiple late nights. And it's just something we learned with experience. And the intro scene should have been done first, and this last sequence should have been done on the second or third day. And I think we would have got a better performance and from everybody. And I think it would have been shot better as well.
Yeah, so I'm gonna stick to my guns. You have no clue what you're talking about. But yeah, I mean, I think to me it's a good scare, but I think I need a different plot point for it. It does get to that climax too. I think I would have ended it with just like, instead of the person running away, the person would just like, after that phone call happens in the bathroom, then it's like game on and they attack them. I think there's something there, but I think the issue was, since we were so attached to it at our level of poor execution, that it should have been avoided. So there's a little bit of debate on that one. They end up having that issue. He shows up and he's like, what's going on here? He comes back from being out there. They start looking at the footage because she's like, call the cops. And he's like, I don't want to call the cops. I need to gaslight you a little bit more. So let's watch the footage. Then he hears Dee up in the attic, and he goes to see her. Now here's where I would flop from what I was saying. I think getting him to this point for the reveal for him that someone's there is actually really, really good. So I think another thing with this that we finally started doing for, I think, the very first time almost, is the split scene element to it, where you have her looking through the footage, you have him going up there, you have her progressing with the footage, you have him talking with Dee, you have her seeing someone's in the house, and then you have the girl behind her. So how do you kind of feel about the setup to that climax? I think that's probably one of the better sequences that we have in this movie.
Yeah, I think it's good. I do. I think it's just shot kind of poorly and awkwardly. But I mean, you're getting to the climax at a good point. And how she gets up there, I'm not really sure, but it happens, and you're splitting your characters up, which is always good. And once again, I think it's kind of cool dynamic, because the main character is like, oh, something's up there, something's up there. He's like, no, there's nothing up there, let me check the footage. And then there is something up there, but it's the grandma. And I kind of like that dynamic. And he kind of goes up there and delivers some really bad dialogue that we wrote. But then the little lights out thing where she shows up in the back of him and kills him is actually really kind of cool. So once again, like, the structure is there, the scares are there. Do we execute on them properly? No, but this one actually is pretty good. And I think, setting off from the bed scare up into this climax is actually pretty good, and actually could be lengthened out a lot more. We just kill him too quick, and then her climax is too quick. Like, if you wanted to pick up an extra 10 minutes, you have a game of cat and mouse in the house. And then really show that this girl creature, has like all these like secret holes and like ways to get through the house to avoid detection. I think that would have been a cool way to do it, where the house is sort of like a maze that or like has like a tunnel system where she kind of like can go in all these different rooms and do all this stuff undetected. I think that payoff would have been a lot more. And then going back to it, if you're talking about the way we'd redo this, the only escape for the main character at this point is to go outside. And if she's afraid of going outside, well, she's in a lot of trouble. So the pieces are there. We just didn't have enough experience to execute properly.
Yeah, I mean, I like, and again, I think this is just a testament to what we always say. You have to film these things because you don't understand until you can sit down and basically do what we're doing right now to explore that. So you have Dee, she shows up and she attacks her boyfriend, or she attacks the boyfriend, which again, the reveal where like the flicker and she's there actually was really good too. She goes up there, she sees Tyler just lying down, like no blood or anything. That was another thing where we're like, man, we probably should have put like some gore on him, because there were a few comments like, is he dead? Like, what happened to him? Is he just sleeping? Because he just looks perfectly fine laying there. Dee goes and she locks the door, which again was another big thing from the writing process, where like, how do they lock the door? And that's why Roger was like, your door locks backwards, that's a permit issue, or whatever the case might have been. Then you get the slowly opening door, she comes out, and then she lunges at our character and we end for it. I think you just need blood and special effects here real quick. So like, you want to just talk about like, this was something where like, maybe a knife or something there. I mean, like, it works, but I think when people are expecting a bad horror movie, they typically still expect gore, even if it is cheesy. I've mentioned this is something that I think, again, special effects cost a ton of money. So that's why, we shy away from it a little bit. But I do think it is something where that kind of highlights the production value. I'm not saying it's an issue as much in indie film, because, you have much bigger issues, but I do think that it's expected from this genre. So you have any thoughts about, just how Dee ended up taking out Tyler, and then our lead Sarah as well too?
Yeah, I mean, just, like, as far as like the special effects go, I mean, that would be the first thing I scale up when we get to like a higher budget, because you can do some really graphic stuff. And it comes back to like making very dark horror movies where the theme is very dark and gritty and realistic. Those are the ones that always perform best. And you need good special effects to pull that off. They're just expensive. I mean, even for like the shapeshifter, I think special effects was 30% of the budget. It's just very expensive. And then not only do you have to do that, you have to shoot it right, and you have to get someone who knows what they're doing as far as like making the practical effects. So really, for the indie film level, unless you really know someone that's like trying to cut you a deal, or you can do it on a really, or you know how to do it yourself. And even then, like the silicone molds and all that stuff is so expensive. It's just, there's probably better ways to spend your money. That being said, it'd be the first thing. I love practical effects. I think having a good stabbing scene. In this one, I probably have the girl like bring him into the crawl hole, and the Sarah girl or whoever the main character is opens that crawl space and with the flashlight turns and sees for the first time the girl in there, like sawing his head off with like a knife or a hacksaw or something like super gritty. And that really thrusts them into the last like 5 to 8 minutes of like a cat and mouse game in the house. So you see like this guy like just getting his head chopped off in this crawl space. Her life is in super danger right now, and you can get a really cool like ending climax sequence. And I think that would have put this movie over the top. But once again, that probably would have cost a couple grand. And there's just a ton of other issues with this movie that could have been addressed before you get to that point.
1000%. Like I was saying, it's something where you can see it being the effect of, increasing the production value. But at the end of the day, I mean, we talk about one of the biggest issues with indie films is like a lot of times they don't even get made. So like if you're putting a lot of money in special effects and you end up with a movie that doesn't actually get finished, well, now you're out a lot more. So what ends up happening from there is it ends at the 48-minute mark, but we had to add at least about 4 minutes of GoPro footage just so we can get past the 50-minute mark with it. And again, I think this is just a testament of running I don't think we actually scrapped any scenes really. I think things just moved a lot quicker than we were expecting. Do you kind of remember why there might have been that gap there? I don't think we really scrapped anything. I just think when we finally put everything together, we're like, oh, that actually goes a lot faster than expected.
I think we cut some stuff. I don't remember cutting. I mean, I can't remember cutting major scenes, but I know the way the DP shot it, which were just like, you didn't really have any cut points to cut around to. Like, you'll hear me talk about being able to manipulate this pace of the movie and editing. Well, if you have a whole bunch of one shots, which is like what we had, there's a lot of one shot wides. You really can't cut around that and make the movie longer or shorter. So I do think that just the way it was shot, really affected the pace of the movie. And we had a lot of like hard cuts, like instead of her, like the guy going up the steps, he just appears in the room. She just appears in rooms. And when you do that, it definitely slows down the movie. So I think it was a combination of just how we shot it. And I think the screenplay was short. I could go back and look at it, but I think that, it just didn't, come out to where it needed to be. And I think we might have ran out of time as we were doing this. I remember this one being I think this was only like 4 or 5 days. So I think we kind of ran out of time and had to like scrap a couple scenes maybe. But off the top of my head, I don't remember any massive cuts or, cuts because we had bad feedback or, any massive changes in the editing process.
Yeah, like I said, I can't remember, any kind of differences in that one. But it did come up short there. So, overall, I think it kind of sums up. We had the rough outline of a horror movie. We didn't quite execute on the horror movie, which is classic indie filmmaking, but it was a really, really important step in the sense of getting there. And I think this to me is like the prime example of like what I would point to as like you got to make a movie like Unseen as an indie filmmaker. I think Gone was really for us to just understand what it's like to be on set. I think The Invited helps us understand what not to do in the sense of going grand, understanding your limits. But I think The Unseen was the first movie that showed us, okay, this is what we need to do. Because from that point on, I think there's a clear difference, in our movies in the sense of understanding these beats, recapping and ensuring the pop scare. So overall, what would you kind of say is, the big learning lesson from this when you review these scenes?
I mean, just looking back on it, I think this is proper pacing. And I think that we had proper pacing in all our movies from here on out. And as far as like, we had the proper scares in there. I think Whitlow does really well. The found footage ones do well. I think we kind of got off a little bit on both Devil in the Room and Morgan Estate because we were really trying to fix the character development issues. And I think we swung too far back. We went away from having the scares that we had in the other 6 movies to really trying to get these character development scenes in there, which are very heavy dialogue scenes. And I think that kind of takes away from, what we're trying to do as, as a core and making a horror movie. But I think this one's really the first one where we had really good pacing. Do we execute properly? No, but the pieces are there. You can start to see our process and how we operate and the kind of movies that we're trying to make. This is sort of the first iteration of that. And we were rewarded with that because, it did really well on the Amazon Prime platform. People watched this one all the way through. They gave it a ton of 1 stars, but at least they watched it all the way through and just didn't turn it off. So you can kind of see like our business model coming into effect here, starting to, us starting to learn how to tell a proper story that's engaging, all the way through.
Yeah, I mean, it really is the case where you understand the pacing, and pacing is really the most important part. So wrapping up, let's go ahead and see how we would change this. We mentioned the trauma in the beginning, and really one of the bigger issues of them getting out of the house is kind of a mental thriller. Picking up from like the halfway point, just kind of on my end, I would say, like you were mentioning, you need to make it, I think by this point in time, the halfway point, you need to make it very clear that she's seen something. And she's like, I saw this person, like this person is here, but because of her current situation, no one believes her. But you show the audience, so the audience understands that there is something there and you make it clear. But I think the question I would pose to the audience is it in her head or is it not in her head? Is it something she's seen or is it something that's actually real there? I'd be vague in that point a little bit. I like the idea of her having like multiple hiding holes, almost kind of like she's dug like a tunnel system throughout the room. And then maybe like the big key breakaway point for her, she discovers the tunnel system, and then that leads into the climax. And then from there, like her brother shows up and her brother gets taken. I like the idea of him being like hacksawed in the tunnel system, like bones or something in there too. Like that would be really, really cool, just showing why there's so many people like missing from that house and all of the research she did. And then I think I think you have to have it where she ends up leaving the house is kind of like the big thing there. But I think with how many people like this movie and how well it did for how it is, I think it does show that it's probably gonna be a concept we're going to look at revisiting at some point in time.
Yeah, I think the way I would do it is I would have her, like the original owners of the house went missing, no one could really figure it out. And then she finds like the tunnel system and finds the bodies of the people. And she's too petrified to leave the house. So she calls like either a therapist or a family member. They come over there, but in the process, she's getting like attacked by the girl on the wall. So she's like hiding. The family member comes inside. They get like hacksawed, their head gets hacksawed off, and then it's just a one-on-one battle, at towards the end for the climax. And she ends up like killing the girl or stopping the threat, and then just going outside as like, oh look, I killed this person, and meeting the police like halfway out there. So she got over, the danger to her life and also her mental illness. But like what Kel said, I think you really can build it up as like a psychological thriller where she's hallucinating, she's seeing things. Is it in her mind or is it not? And you finally get the reveal that, oh, it's true, that this is just a crazy kind of thing that happened to her. And I think you have a solid movie. Like honestly, you could probably write that movie, but once again, you're gonna have to shoot it in a unique way because it's gonna be one location, one actress. You're gonna have to edit in a unique way to keep the tension flowing all the way through. And you're gonna have a really, really strong lead actress to carry this movie because you're not gonna have other actors to fall back on, other locations to fall back on. Would I like to shoot it? Yeah, but I think that there is additional resources and things that are going to be out of my control, sort of at our budget level right now.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to sum it up. And that's going to go ahead and wrap up the scene by scene breakdown. Next week, we're going to hop into The Haunting of the Whitlow House, which is a DBS favorite. I'm excited to break that one down. But as always, be sure to take a look at us online. We make movies for our fans, with our fans. So if you want to be part of the fun, if you want to see behind the scenes, if you want to be in the movies, all of that stuff stems from our amazing Discord community. Be sure to take a look at The Haunting of the Murder House online. Into the Forest is now on Tubi. But until then, have a good one.